Hey everyone, sorry for the delay and the previous stream ended because of my internet. So I'm going to be starting all over again. Let me just put the video link or the live link in my Telegram channel so that the others can also join and then we'll get started. Hey everyone, sorry for the delay and the previous stream ended. Okay, I have done that. So let's start. So basically, I was trying to study it because I have my mocks coming up from Wednesday and I haven't really practiced biology. So I'm thinking of doing inheritance and the following chapters for maybe 2 or 3 hours and then sleeping. It's actually about 12 now. So let's see how much I can go. So let's start. So basically, what I was saying is that you need to know the key definitions in biology if you really want to ace it. For example, inheritance is the transmission of genetic information from generation to generation. Now, whenever a question comes from this chapter, they usually do ask you to define it. So you do need to know your definitions, and they also come in MCQs, right? Moving on, chromosomes are thread-like structures of DNA carrying genetic information. Now, the way I remember this is like I know chromosomes look something like this. Okay, something like this with centromere or something like that in the middle. So as you can see that this looks like a thread of a DNA. So this is a thread of DNA which carries genetic information in the forms of genes. So this thread can have a gene of maybe something, hair color or something. So it's carrying these genes of genetic information of the DNA, right? So remember that chromosomes are found in the nucleus of the cell, okay? And the gene is a short length of DNA found on a chromosome that codes for a specific protein. Now the same thing. It's a short length of DNA found on the chromosome that codes for a specific protein. Now this is really important because this could be a structural protein such as collagen found in skin cells, an enzyme, or an hormone. Now, you need to know that hormones and enzymes are also forms of proteins if you didn't know that. The sequence of bases in a gene determines, okay, that's repeated, determines the sequence of amino acids used to make a specific protein and specific shapes of the protein. So, yeah, let's move on. Diploid and haploid nucleus. Now, this isn't something that's really complicated. Diploid, where the DI stands for two, so two sets of chromosomes. Haploid mean one set of chromosome. So all humans have 23 different chromosomes, okay, in each cell. In most body cells, not including the gametes, okay, this is really important. Not including the gametes, we have two copies of each chromosome, leading to a total of 46 chromosomes. That means that diploid cells are how many? There are 46 chromosomes, whereas haploid cells are 23 chromosomes. Now, diploid cells can only be body cells or something that we call somatic cells. Somatic cells are all cells except gamete cells. This means that haploid cells can only be gamete cells. Okay, then moving on, nuclei with two sets of chromosomes are known as diploid nucleus. The gamete, egg, and sperm cells only have one copy of each chromosome, meaning they have a total of 23 chromosomes in each nucleus. Nuclei with one or single set of chromosomes are known as haploid nucleus. Okay, now it's important you add the single set, okay, because this set shows us that we are talking about the 23 different chromosomes that are there. Then moving on to chromosomes, these are what, okay, so it says a scanning electron micrograph of human chromosomes just before a cell divides. Each chromosome is made up of two identical thick threads joined together. These will split apart so that each cell gets a thread when the cell divides. Now, when we talk about cell division, this is what we know call nuclear division. Okay, just a second. Your voice isn't loud. It's okay. I think my voice isn't loud. Let me try and get my headphone. Just a second. Okay, I think that this should be better. Let's just check. Okay, using the headphone now, which should be better. Yes, let's continue then. If you can hear me now clearly, just let me know in the chats, right? So these are chromosomes. You can see that we have 23 chromosomes in females and we have 23 chromosomes in male. Now you notice something over here, right? In the females, you can see that we have the 23, males, we have the 23, but on the 23rd chromosome, you see X, right? But on the male's 23rd chromosome, you see an X and you see Y, okay? Because for females, right? The chromosomes for female are always going to be X and X, okay? So this is what the X chromosome, and then this is another X chromosome, okay? Or as they have drawn over here. But when you come to the males, right? The chromosomes they have are X and Y, okay? Now this is because we have one big chromosome and then we have a smaller chromosome. And now the concept of this comes up later in the following topics that we are going to be looking at. So you need to know that males have X and Y chromosome, whereas females have only X chromosomes, right? Then cell division. This is something almost all of us know. Cell division is of two types, mitosis and meiosis. Now, both of them are what? They are both a nuclear division, okay? They are both a nuclear division, which means that the contents in the cell is dividing, right? In the nucleus is dividing. But the difference here is that in mitosis, it gives rise to genetically identical cells, whereas in meiosis, it gives rise to genetically different cells, right? Um, Mitosis, it divides to form all types of cells except gamete cells, okay? And meiosis divides to form only gamete cells. Meiosis increases genetic variation, is also called reduction division. Now, the way why they are saying this and this is because mitosis, right? If it's giving rise to genetically identical cells, that means that if I have 46 chromosomes before, and right before, then if it's going to be identical, then it will also have 46 chromosomes after. That means that these are identical and they are basically body cells, right? But when you come to meiosis, you have 46 before, but then this becomes 23, another becomes 23. So after, you see that 23 is not the same as 46 before. That's why it gives rise to genetically different cells. Now you know 23 are found only in gametes. That's why meiosis gives rise to gametes, whereas mitosis gives rise to genetically identical, which are body cells. Importance of mitosis. Now, mitosis is important for growth, repair of damaged cells. If the is damaged tissues, sorry, if the tissues are damaged, then we are able to form the same genetically identical cells in order to repair them. Replacement of a cell, if one of them dies, then using mitosis, we can make another one and replace. Asexual reproduction. Now, if you have done the previous chapters on asexual reproduction, I'm sure you know why we use mitosis for uh, asexual reproduction. Then meiosis is for what? It's for sexual reproduction. Yes, let's move on. The process of mitosis. Now, this is also very important. Before that, let me just check if there's anything in the comment section. Um, okay, not that I see anything. All right. Yep. Okay, let's continue. So, process of mitosis. Don't look at it and be scared, okay? Just calm down and we'll go through it. So just before mitosis, each chromosome in the nucleus copies itself exactly. So it forms X-shaped chromosome. So at first, you can see that the chromosomes are like this, but then just before the mitosis process, these duplicate. So if I had this, this will become this, and then they'll form a X shape like this. Oh, okay. So what happens over here is that we have DNA duplication. In fact, let me just get my notebook so that because I've written this in more detail over there. All right, let me just open to that page. Give it a second. Um, Variation and inheritance. Um, there we go. Okay, found it. So you see, let me first explain the process so that we don't have to look at it again. So at first we have our cell like this. Okay. Now this we have DNA replication, not duplication. Sorry, we have DNA replication, which forms a cell like this, and then we say that they form an X shape, so like this. Then the nucleus envelope breaks off. You see this nucleus envelopes, right? This nuclei envelope. These chromosomes become so big that they break the nucleus envelope. Okay, so it becomes this. So nucleus envelope breaks off. Okay. Then what happens is that we have something called the spindle fibers, which hold them and arrange them in the center. So like this. So we have, so these spindle fibers pull them and arrange them in the center or line them along the center. Then what happens is that a new nuclear envelope starts to form. So one here, and yes. So as a new nuclear, let me just write spindle fibers here. New nuclei envelope starts to form, and then through a process of cytokinesis we have our two daughter cells. Okay, just ignore my drawing. Okay, how do you spell this? Cytokinesis, sorry. Yeah, kinesis. So as you can see, they are both genetically identical to the parent cell, right? Let's move on. So this is basically everything that it was saying. And let me just check something. Okay. Then mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis, we have two cells produced known as daughter cells. Meiosis, four cells produced also known as daughter cells. Their daughter cells are diploid. There's a haploid. Daughter cells are genetically identical to each other and to the parent cell, are genetically different from each other and the parent cell. Two cell divisions occur, only one cell division occur in mitosis. Now, you do not need to know the process for meiosis. You needed to know this at first, but from the little knowledge that I have, at first, for meiosis to happen, first mitosis happens, producing two cells like this, and then meiosis happens of both of them, which produces 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is why we say four daughter cells are happening. Okay. Then we have something called the stem cells. Stem cells are unspecialized cells that divide by mitosis and produce new daughter cells that can become specialized within the tissue and be used for different functions. Now, when defining, we have some key points that we need to make mention of. The first one is the unspecialized cell. Oops, I don't know, my highlighter isn't working. Okay, that's it. So unspecialized cells, which are dividing by the process of mitosis, which produce daughter cells that can become specialized within the tissue and be used for different functions. Yes. Then we have monohybrid inheritance. As we said, inheritance is the transmission of genetic information from generation to generation. Now, these are the definitions that you do need to know. Okay, so allele, any two or more alternate form of a gene. Okay, oops, coming. We just change the color for once. Okay, so any two or more alternate forms of genes. Genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism in terms of the alleles present, and phenotype is the observable features of an organism. Now, the way to remember this is genotype, right? So G, which stands for genes, okay, which means the genetic makeup. Then phenotype, Phi or P, which stands for the physical observable features. That's the way I remember it. Then we have homozygous. It's having two identical alleles that breed together, which will result of alleles of a particular gene. And when two identical homozygous individuals breed together, that will be termed as pure breeding. Now, homozygous could be big X, or small x, as long as they are both the same alleles of a particular gene. And when they crossbreed, or when they breed together, that will produce something called pure breeding. Then we have heterozygous. It's having two different alleles of a particular gene. A heterozygous individual will not be a pure breeding. So heterozygous is something like we have big X and small x. Okay. Now there are two different genes, but of the two different alleles of the same genes. But when you breed something like a big X, X, and a small x, this will not be pure breeding. Okay. And then we have dominant and recessive. Simple definitions is an allele that is expressed if it's present. So it doesn't matter if it needs to be homozygous or heterozygous. As long as it's present, it will be expressed. And recessive is an allele which is only expressed when there is no dominant allele. So recessive is only expressed when you have small x and small x like this. Then monohybrid inheritance is the inheritance of characteristics controlled by a single gene. Monohybrid cross is a cross between two parents who possess different forms of a gene. Here the inheritance of only one gene is considered. Monohybrid inheritance can be illustrated and understood by using pedigree diagrams and genetic diagrams. Now you need to know a lot about pedigree diagrams as well. Oops, black does not work. Maybe something like blue. Okay, pedigree diagrams, because these are basically the foundations of genetic inheritance of the chapter. So we did this allele gene part of a DNA, or part of a DNA found on the chromosome that codes for a specific protein, right? So this is something that I'm going to waste my time reading because I already know it and I have to finish the syllabus fast. So I'm going to skip this. The term pure breeding indicates that the individual is homozygous for that characteristics. Example, TT, small t, big T, or small t, small t. I've talked about this. Heterozygous organisms are not pure breeding. Okay. All right. Now we come to genetic diagrams. This is a standard way of showing all steps in making the predictions. So you're making predictions because you can never be 100% sure of what you predicted would be what comes about the probable genotypes and the phenotypes of the offspring from two parents. So the steps basically are: write down the phenotypes, write down the genotypes, write down the gametes. Gametes are basically your alleles circled like this, and then you just draw a triangle at this thing, a square, and then you work on it. This is also called a Punnett square, by the way. Then you write down the percentage probability. I don't know if it's mentioned here. And you also write down the phenotypes and the genotypes of the offsprings. Right. Then here's an example. For example, you have the phenotypes as gray and gray. Now we know they are gray and gray because they are both heterozygous. That means that the gene coding for the gray is the dominant big G. So offsprings, we have the eggs here and the sperm here, which will form a gray. Now the small g, which are recessive, are coding for the charcoal. So this is just a way of knowing which genotypes and the phenotypes of possible crossbreeds, right? So I'm going to skip this and then move on to something that I have to do. Okay, pedigree diagram. Now, pedigree diagram is a way of showing the phenotype and sometimes the genotype of the family members in several generations. All the individuals in one generation are shown in the same row. This is really important. Males are shown with a square symbol and females with a circle. So these are represented, squares are represented as males and circles are represented as females. And if they are like parents, then they are connected using a horizontal line, and their offsprings are connected using a vertical line going down, right? So this is an example, male, female, offspring, their parents, then the same continues. If this breeds like this, then their offspring will continue like this, right? What can we work out with pedigree diagram? So basically the questions on it are not that difficult, and I really have to focus on some other topics as well. So I'll skip this and I'll just go over the main topics. So we have codominance, alleles that are both expressed in the phenotype when they are both present. Okay, so we have the genotype AA, which means that AA, blood group A, AB, that means blood group AB. Now this is codominance because the allele for A and the allele for B are both dominant, as you can see over here and here. When we have A and O present, A is expressed because this is dominant. B and O, B is expressed because B is dominant. When you have O and O recessive, then O is expressed. So if you have two dominants and they are both being expressed, that's what you call codominance, when alleles that are both expressed in the phenotype when they are present. So an example of codominance in humans is our blood group, just so you remember. Blood group. Inheritance, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sex-linked characteristics. This is important to know, okay? Sex-linked characteristics are features in which the gene located is on a sex chromosome and that this makes the characteristics more common in one sex than the other. Now, the sex chromosomes are basically the XX and XY that I told you. XX are for females and XY are for males. Now you remember that XX looked something like this, XY looked something like this. Now because this Y is a bit shorter, you do not look at the alleles on this. You do not need to know the details of this, but I'm just giving you the gist of it. That's why you don't see anything written on the Y over here or the Y over here, but you see something written on the X, okay? So sex-linked characteristics are basically, as I said, features in which the gene is located on a sex chromosome. Saying that will give you one mark, and that this characteristic is more common in one sex than the other gives you another mark. Now you only need to know two sex-linked characteristics, which is hemophilia and red-green color blindness and hemophilia. Okay. So in almost all cases, there are only chromosomes on the X chromosome as the Y chromosome is much smaller, exactly as we looked over here. So the same goes over here. I'm not going to go into much detail. Then, okay, protein synthesis. I think we are close to the ending of this chapter. Gene coding for the protein remains in the nucleus. Okay, gene coding for the protein remains in the nucleus. DNA itself cannot travel out of the nucleus because it's too big to travel out of the nucleus to the ribosomes. Now, Before, when we were looking at the chapter cells, um, we were often told that what does the ribosome do? The function of ribosome is protein synthesis. We just wrote it. But now we actually understand what protein synthesis is in this chapter. So yes, the DNA is far too big to pass through a nuclear pore. So the base code of each gene is copied onto an RNA molecule called the messenger RNA. Okay, so what it's saying is that because the DNA is too big to travel out of the nuclear pore itself, the base codes which we learned were what? A, T complementary, C, G complementary. They are copied onto something called the mRNA, and then the mRNA moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Saying into the cytoplasm also has a mark on its own, and then it attaches to the ribosome. Then the ribosome assemble the amino acids into protein, whichever protein the body wants or we require. Once the amino acid chain has been assembled, it is released from the ribosome so that it can fold and form the final structure of the protein. The specific sequence of amino acid is determined by the sequence of bases in the mRNA. I think we have a visual presentation over here. Okay, I think this slide is just repeated. Yes, so we have this complicated thing. Well, let me see if I can go it. So the DNA unwinds. Yes, you get 1 mark for saying that the DNA unwinds, and then the gene is copied onto your mRNA, which is the messenger RNA. The messenger RNA moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm, so like this. Then mRNA passes through the ribosome, and then the ribosome assembles the amino acid into a particular order to make a protein molecule. And yes, I don't think we need to know. Yeah, done for this chapter. Let me see. Let me just mark it off. So I'm done with inheritance. Uh, okay. Now maybe I'm going to do variation and selection. For this chapter, instead of opening the notes, I'm going to be using my notes and maybe trying explaining them. Yeah. Okay, so this is also quite a big chapter, but I'm going to try and cover it pretty fast, I guess. So we have variation. Let me check if I have the notes. If that's faster, then maybe I'll just do that. Variation and selection. Just give me a minute. Okay. Okay, no, I don't have it here. It's on different pen drive. Okay, let's start nonetheless. So variation and selection. Okay, so variation is the difference between individuals of the same species. This is the difference between individuals of the same species. Now we have two types of variation. Okay, let me increase the font. So, yep. So variation now of two types. The first one that we have is discontinuous, and we have continuous. Okay, so I'm not going to be writing down everything, but the main stuff only. So discontinuous variation is a variation in which there are distinct categories of phenotypes with no intermediate. So I have to write down the definition because it's important. So there are what? Distinct categories of phenotypes let me write this down in red, with no intermediates. Okay, it's always caused by genes. Now, this is the biggest thing you need to know. Discontinuous is caused by genes only. Okay, so one reason for the difference between individuals is that their genotypes are different. For example, blood groups are controlled by our genes. Blood groups are an example of discontinuous variation because everyone fits into one of the four definite categories, which are the B, AB, or O. Now, someone cannot come and tell me that their blood group is Z because it doesn't exist. So it's part of a distinct number of phenotypes that there are. So there are no intermediates. We don't have A1, A1, B2, O3, something like that. We just have A, B, AB, or O. That's all. Another example is presence or absence of horns in cattle. So a cattle can either have horns or it cannot have horns. There's no intermediate that maybe it has half horns, maybe it has one fourth the horn. Okay, it has horns or it doesn't. We also have wrinkled and round seeds in peas. Then we move on to continuous variation. Continuous variation is where there's a continuous range of phenotypes. Continuous range of phenotypes between two extremes. And this is caused by what? Genes and the environment. Okay, so examples are your weight, your height, the length of a human, and only features from genes are passed on. Features from environment are not passed on. You need to remember that. Then we come on to causes of genetic variation. I'm just going to write GV. So we first have mutation. Now, mutation, you need to know the definition for mutation. Mutation is the genetic change. Okay, it's described as the random change in the base sequence of DNA. Okay, random change in the base sequence of DNA. Okay, it's described as a genetic change. Gene mutation is described as random change in the base sequence of DNA exactly. New alleles are formed after mutation. The forming of new alleles is what causes genetic variation to take place. Your genes are changing, right? We describe variation as the difference between individuals of the same species. So different individuals are having different uh, different alleles. That's why there's genetic variation. Factors that cause mutation include ionizing radiation. We have such as X-rays, gamma radiation, beta radiation, and alpha radiation. Radiation can cause the bases in DNA molecules to can damage the bases in DNA molecules. If this happens in the ovaries or testes, then the altered DNA may be passed on to the offspring. Then we move on to meiosis. Meiosis. Now we talked about meiosis. Meiosis was the nuclear division of a cell which produces genetically different cells, right? Different daughter cells. So during sexual reproduction, gametes are formed by meiosis. In meiosis, pairs of homologous chromosomes exchange genes and separates from one another. So the gametes which are formed contain different combinations of alleles. So we have 23 from the male, 23 from the female, and when they come together, we have 46. Now, 23, these chromosomes are different, these are different. So when they come together, they'll have some of this forming the complete this. So now each child would be different like that, right? Not everyone having the same forms of characteristics. Then the third one is random mating and random fertilization. In most populations of animals and plants, any male individuals and any female individuals can potentially reproduce together, and any two male and female gametes fuse together at fertilization. So there are many possible combinations of alleles that could be produced in the zygote. In an organism with a large number of genes, the possibility of two offspring having identical genotype is so small that it's almost considered impossible. Then we move on to fitness and all that. So, fitness is described as the ability of an organism to survive and reproduce in an environment. So, it's the ability of an organism to survive and reproduce. Now, if you don't mention even one, if you only mention the ability of an organism to survive in an environment, you are not going to get your full mark. You have to mention, so, oh, don't spell that wrong. Reproduce. Okay, so you have to mention the survive and the reproduction in its environment. Then we move on to Now, adaptive features are inherited features. Okay, this is the different bit that we need to know between adaptation and adaptive features. These are inherited features that helps an organism to do what? To survive and to reproduce in an environment. Then adaptation is the process resulting from random selection by which population becomes more suited to their environment over many generations. So it's something resulting from what? Natural selection. Something resulting from natural solution, selection by which populations are becoming what? More suited their environment over many generations. Then we have to know the adapted features of two types of plants before moving on to selection. I think come back to this when we are done with natural selection. Okay, so we have to talk about xerophyte and hydrophyte. Hy- Hydrophyte. Now, xerophyte is basically plants that have adaptive features that help it to survive in an environment where water is scarce. So where water is scarce, and hydrophytes are plants that have adaptive features that help it to survive in an environment where there's a lot of water. So, hydro means water, right? That means it has a lot of water. So the opposite of that is just water is not there, or water is scarce. So that's the way you can remember xerophyte and hydrophyte. So I'm just going to be reading over their adaptive features that they have, because I have to move on to other things too. So they have a closing stomata, which prevents excessive water loss by diffusion. They have a thick waxy cuticle, which is a waterproof layer preventing evaporation. They have hairy leaves, which trap moisture, and then the moisture is basically what? Water vapor, which they use for photosynthesis. They have sunken and closed stomata on the underside of the leaves, which decreases water loss. They have reduced surface area of leaves. An example of xerophyte is actually cactus. Okay, just a second. Yeah, it is cactus. And you can see that cactus look like this, right? And they have their spikes coming out like this. So these spikes are actually their leaves, okay, that have reduced surface area for a slower rate of diffusion of water. They have deep or spread roots. So the roots of this cactus, assuming this, they are deep in the soil so that they can look for water. Because you know that water is already scarce, so you want to try and get the maximum water you can, and that is the job of the roots. Let me explain this ones as well, the adaptive features. So in the notes that I have. So closing stomata means that since plants lose most water as water vapor through their stomata, if they close their stomata, transpiration slows down to an almost complete stop. However, If stomata is closed, photosynthesis cannot happen because CO2 cannot diffuse into the leaf. That's why the stomata, even though it closes for most of the time, it does open for photosynthesis to happen. We have a waxy cuticle, which is on top of the upper epidermis, which is made by the cells, and it makes the leaf waterproof. Then the cuticle cuts down water loss in two ways. It acts as a barrier to evaporation, and it's a shiny surface which reflects light, so it lowers the temperature. We have hairy leaves. Some plants that live in very dry areas have hairy hairs on their leaves, right? These hairs trap a layer of moisture next to the leaf. The moist air reduces the diffusion gradient for water vapor from the leaf into the air, so less water diffuses out of the leaf. Then we move on to just a second. Okay, they have unsunken stomata on the underside of the leaves. When water vapor diffuses out through the stomata, it collects in the air trapped in the pits. This reduces the diffusion gradient, so less water diffuses out of the leaf. Okay, I'm going to read that again. So sunken stomata on the underside of the leaf. Okay, when water vapor diffuses out through the stomata, okay, the water vapor has diffused out through the stomata, it collects in the air trapped in the pits. Okay, this reduces diffusion gradient, so less water diffuses out of the leaf. Got it. Reduces surface area of leaves. Smaller the surface area, less water vapor diffuses out of it. Having deep or spread roots. Plants that have very deep roots seek for more water very deep down in the soil. Okay. Then we have hydrophyte. Now, these were for xerophyte, and I talked a lot about it, I guess. So maybe I'm just going to quickly go over the hydrophytes and then we move on to selection. So hydrophytes, as we said, plants that have adaptive features that help it to survive in an environment where there's a lot of water. So the leaves are highly divided to create a large surface area for absorption and photosynthesis. Now, these are the exact opposite of xerophytes. They have very little cuticle formation because as much as the water is diffusing, you can let it diffuse. You have more water under it because you're basically a plant in water. Very little cuticle formation, lack of xylem tubes or reduced xylem tubes or vessels. The lower epidermis lacks stomata to prevent water entering the air spaces, so stomatas are rather present on the upper epidermis for gas exchange. Roots are often reduced and root hairs are often um, absent. Oh God, I have a lot to talk about. Let me see how much is left. Okay, so after we are done with selection, I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break, I guess. Yeah. So selection, adaptive features are caused by, oh, so selection, sorry. So selection, we have two types of selection. We have natural and we have selective or artificial. So adaptive features are caused by genes. Individuals whose alleles give them slightly better adaptive features are more likely to survive and reproduce than the other individuals in the population. This is for natural selection. So the alleles are more likely to be passed on to the next generation. Over time, this results in more and more of the population having these alleles. We say that they are adapted individually. Better adapted individuals, those with alleles that give them slightly better adaptive features, are selected. I'm coming, let me just drink water. So, the way we define natural selection is that when organisms with favorable alleles and special characteristics have a higher probability of surviving and reproducing. For example, I was recently doing a question where they asked, why do sharks have, yeah, I think it was sharks. Why do sharks have better eyesight or really good eyesight? And I wrote down the answer. Let me just read it to you guys so that you understand when you can talk about natural selection and where you cannot. So the answer was that there was genetic variation, which could have been caused by mutation. And then I defined mutation, which was a new alleles random change in the base sequence of DNA. New alleles would have arisen that increase the fitness of the shags, maybe due to better competitors. Better feature organisms are more likely to survive and reproduce, passing on their alleles, and eventually all the organisms or all the sharks in the water will have the feature, which could be caused by natural selection. Now, I know I didn't really explain this well because I really want to move ahead quickly and finish it. That's why I'll maybe make a separate video on it later once my mocks are done. So natural selection is described with reference to there's variation within population, production of many offspring, there's a struggle for survival, including competition for resources, a greater chance of reproduction by individuals that are better adapted to their environment than others, alleles that confer using adaptations more likely to be passed on. So there's competition for resources, better adapted survives, best adapted reproduces, passing on the alleles. Now we have something called the selective pressure. Anything in the environment that affects the chance that individuals with different features will survive and reproduce. Then that was all about natural selection. Then we have selective or artificial breeding, choosing of organisms of desired characteristics to breed together and continuing this over many generations. Now, this is done by us humans. So we select the organisms that have the better and desired characteristics, we breed them, and then we continue this over many generations. Uh, so how does selective breeding happen? Selection by humans with desirable features, crossing them with individuals to produce the next generation, selection of offspring showing the desirable features, such as cows that produce more milk, wheat that is easier to separate from grain, dogs which have better appearance, and many more. Then let's quickly look at, just a second, let's quickly look at differences between natural and artificial selection. Let me just select this. Yeah. So in natural selection, environment selects which individuals to breed. But in artificial selection, it's us humans that are selecting. In natural selection, there's random meeting between individuals. In artificial selections, humans decide which individuals reproduce with each other. Then, in natural selection, chances of survival and reproducing increases due to adaptive features. In artificial selection, their chances of surviving in the wild are less likely. Natural selection, selective advantages of a particular feature can be quite small, and there's only a slightly better chance of some individuals surviving rather than the others. But in individuals, only the very best organisms are chosen to reproduce. Natural selection has more variation than artificial selection. Natural selection, the speed of change in a population is quite slow, whereas artificial selection is very fast. Uh, yeah, so I'm going to be taking a 10 minutes break and then we'll continue again. All right, let's continue. So we are done with chapters. Let's see. So inheritance, we are done. Variation and selection to your done. Let me get the notes for organisms in the environment. Give me a second. Okay, so I have gotten it. So here they are. Let me just quickly check something and then we'll get started. Okay. So, organisms and the environment, energy flow. The sun is the principal source of energy input to biological systems. Energy flow is not a cycle. It starts from the sun and then that energy is harnessed by plants, which are eaten by animals, which are also eaten by other animals. So, at each step, energy is lost to the environment. Note that with the exception of atomic energy and tidal energy, all the other energy released on Earth is derived from sunlight. So now we also have geothermal energy, by the way, but that's more of, I think, physics. Geothermal energy, which is renewable. We have which does not require energy from the sun. Now, very important point over here is that energy flow is not a cycle. Okay, so there has been an MCQ before where they asked whether what kind of energy flow was. So there was a table like this, okay, and then there was something over here, and then I remember here you had to choose between non-cyclical and cyclical. So the correct answer would be non-cyclical because we know that energy flow is not a cycle. And then the sun is the principal source of energy input to the biological systems. And then at each step, energy is lost to the environment. This is basically the main things that you need to know for this chapter. Food chains and food webs. A food chain is a chart showing the flow of energy from one organism to the next, beginning with a producer. So the first organism, the first at the first trophic level, it will always be a producer. Okay. Oops, let's draw this wrong. Okay. So who's a producer? A producer is an organism that makes its own organic nutrients. It makes its own organic nutrients, usually using usually using energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. So we know that producer they're talking about plants because plants are the only other ones that photosynthesize and use energy from sunlight and make their own nutrients. A food web is a network of interconnected food chains, and we'll look at examples of them. So, a food web, a network of interconnected food chains. A food chain is a chart showing the flow of energy, so energy flow from one organism to the next, always beginning with a producer. A consumer is an organism that gets its energy by feeding on other organisms. Consumers may be classified as primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary according to their positions in the food chain. Now, some of the questions usually asked why do we not have more than five trophic levels? So we have a producer here, primary level, secondary, tertiary, and then quaternary. We have one, two, three, four, and then five. Why do we not have more than five tropic levels? This is a common question asked from this topic, and we'll be looking at the answer to it soon as we look at the end of the chapter. Okay, so yeah, so we have four types of consumers. Consumers can be classified as primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary according to their position in a food chain. A primary consumer is an animal that eats plants. Secondary consumers are animals that prey on plant eaters. Some also drink milk. Tertiary consumers feed on secondary consumers, and quaternary consumers, an animal that is at the top of the food chain, which feed on what? On the tertiary consumers. Let me just decrease my volume. Yeah. Uh, then herbivore, an animal that gets its plant by eating that gets its energy, sorry, by eating plants. Carnivore, an animal that gets its energy by eating other animals. Decomposer, an organism that gets its energy from dead or waste organic material. An ecosystem is a unit containing all the organisms and the environment interacting together in a given area. Trophic level is the position of an organism in a food chain, food web, pyramid of numbers, or pyramid of biomass, or pyramid of energy. So now I'm just going to give myself like 2 minutes to read it in my mind and get it. Right? Alright. So as we said, a food chain is a charging flow of energy from one organism to the next, beginning with a producer. Food web, a network of interconnected food chains. Now, impact humans have on food chains and food web are to the following. Now, there are two ways that we can do it. One, to impact through over harvesting of food species and impact of introducing a foreign species to an habitat. So what happens is that when you over harvest, right, there's a decrease in biodiversity, there's a risk of extinction of a species, and it disrupts the natural food chain of the habitat. Then introducing a foreign species, it disrupts the natural food chain, loss of habitat as the foreign species now take over the original species, and no natural predator to control the population of the species, of the which species of the foreign species that have come. So we do not have any natural predator to control that. Then trophic level, it's the position of an organism in a food chain, food web, or pyramid of biomass or numbers. So as you can see, producers are actually on trophic level 1, grasshoppers on trophic level 2, flycatchers on trophic level 3. So you start from the down and you go all the way up, right? Energy loss. Now this is where I was referring to. Why do we not have more than 5 trophic levels? So, as energy is passed along a food chain, some of it is lost to the environment, and this happens in several ways as follows. When an organism uses glucose and other organic compounds for respiration, some of the energy released from the glucose is lost as heat energy to the environment. When one organism eats another organism, it rarely eats absolutely all of it, so not all of the energy is transferred while eating. When an animal eats another organism's enzymes in its digestive system break down most of the large nutrient molecules so that they can be absorbed, but not all of the nutrient molecules are digested and absorbed. Some just pass through the alimentary canal and are eventually lost from the bodies in the form of feces. These feces also contain energy that is lost from the food chain. Okay, so this means that the further you go up along a food chain, the less energy is available for each successive group of organisms. For example, in this figure 18.5, the plant gets a lot of light energy from the sun, but only a fraction of that energy is absorbed by the grasshopper. Why? Because some of it is lost as in transpiration. The grasshopper does not entirely eat, the plant only eats some part of it. That's why not all the energy is transferred and only a fraction of it is transferred. So we can thereby link that the sun as energy flowing from the sun as light energy, and then through a food chain in the form of chemical energy and organic nutrients, and finally back to the environment as heat energy. So energy from the sun, light energy like this. So some is lost as heat energy, to the what? To the environment. So please remember to the environment as heat energy. And when it's passing through this food chain, this is chemical energy lost in respiration is heat energy. Food chains exactly have fewer than five trophic levels because energy transfer is inefficient. Now, saying this will also give you one. Okay? This is because the producers get a lot of the energy from the sun, but only a fraction of that energy is absorbed by the primary consumer, and then a fraction of that is absorbed by the secondary consumer. At each level, heat is lost in respiration. Now, when you come and look at the efficiency of energy transfer, the closer to the beginning of the food chain you have, the more energy that's available for us. That's why staple foods such as wheat, rice, and potatoes are plants because they have more energy in them. Humans eating plants is more efficient than humans eating animals. Why? Because when you eat meat, eggs, or cheese, or drink milk, you're feeding further along the food chain. There's less energy available for us from the original energy provided by the sun. So it would be more efficient in principle. Okay. It would be more efficient in principle. Let's do this for humans to eat the grass in the field rather than to let the cattle eat it, but then to eat the cattle itself. But although there's far more energy in the grass than in the cattle, it's not available to us. Why? Because we cannot digest the cellulose in grass, so we cannot release the energy from it. Whereas the cattle can't digest the cellulose, so they turn the energy in cellulose into energy in protein and fat, which we can digest. However, there are still many plant products that we can eat. Soya beans, for example, have a lot of protein with them, so it's more efficient and cheap than cattle or other animals. So it's not energy efficient to feed soybeans to cattle, then eat the cattle. Eat the soybeans instead of eating the cattle. So we need to know the three types of pyramids that we have. We have pyramid of numbers, we have pyramid of biomass, and we have pyramid of energy. Right. Pyramid of numbers, it's a diagram in which the area of the bar at each trophic level shows the relative number. Okay, it shows the number of each organism at a level in a food chain. Now remember this. A pyramid of numbers is the only pyramid that can be like this, like an actual pyramid, or like a cake as I remember it, or it can also be like this. Because over here, you're looking at the number of organisms, not the energy or biomass in them. Um, yes. So despite the name, yeah, basically what I said, yeah, and here. Example of a non-pyramid shape of a pyramid of numbers is that this is possible because the size of the organism is also important. One large organism, such as the oak tree over here, in the pyramid above contains enough energy to support many smaller organisms, such as the insect and then the wood. Then pyramid of biomass. This is a graph showing the relative quantity of biomass at each trophic level. Coming, let me just drink water. So a graph showing the relative quantity of biomass at each trophic level. Now biomass and pyramid of energy are always pyramid shaped. Biomass definition is what? Total dry mass of a plant or animal species in a food chain or food web. It includes looking at the dry mass, which means that all the water in the organism has been removed, and then you are now looking at the mass of it, right? We said this. So advantages of using POB over PON. Pyramid of biomass are much better than pyramid of numbers because they take the size of each organism into account. Pyramid of biomass are more informative than pyramid of number because they give a better picture of the quantity of energy that's present at each trophic level. Then we have pyramid of energy. Graph showing the relative quantity of energy at each trophic level. Pyramids of numbers and pyramids of biomass are useful ways of visualizing the number of masses of organisms at different levels of a food chain or food web. That's a lot of reading. Okay. Anyways, but as we have seen, what actually determines the number of biomass organisms at each trophic level is the quantity of energy that's available to them. And I'm just going to skip through. Okay, so we have nitrogen and carbon cycle, but I'm too lazy to read through all of this. Let me just see how much we have. Okay, that's a. So I'm just quickly going to read through it in my mind because I want to finish this really fast. I'll have to sleep. It's already 1:11 now. So yeah, sorry I won't be explaining this one, and I'll just be going through it in my head real fast. Just a second. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you can read along with me. Uh, hey guys, so I think it's quite late now, so I might go and sleep or I might continue. I don't know. I'm a bit tired today, so I think that'll be all for today. And maybe we'll have one tomorrow for